I'm going to now introduce Johanna Tablada. As I said before, she's the General Deputy Director of US Affairs at the Cuban Foreign Ministry. And if you've been following news from Cuba, you will recognize her name because she regularly gives important and dynamic interviews about the US blockade and communications between the US and Cuba. And I hope many more of you will follow her interviews and the information that she puts out following tonight's meeting. So over to you, Johanna. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for such an introduction. I would like to start by telling you on behalf of the Foreign Affairs Ministry to the organizers of this wonderful event to express gratitude for again putting your energy, your talent, and effort as friends of Cuba on a Sunday afternoon or evening for probably most of you to work for solidarity with Cuba. It is something that the Cuban people that has been so heroic and noble and solidarious, I think it deserves, but still I would like to thank you. So since we have 10 minutes, I will concentrate and focus on mainly which is the situation now with the government of the United States, Biden specifically, policy on Cuba. What did we inherit from Trump, and which is the specific impact that the Cuban population is suffering. So it's the policy, the Biden policy remains Trump policy. And this is something that is important to tell, because even when Cuba is being under an economic war, it is also under a misinformation war as well, or misinformation systematic misinformation operations that also describe exactly the opposite of what is going on. I was commenting you before that, for example, even for a Cuban to join Zoom platform for any event, a scientific, cultural, academic, or political event, will have to circumvent the net, since Cuba, contrary to the speech of US that keeps talking about giving Cubans internet, we do have internet from one end to the other of the island, despite US, and not the other way around. They banned Cuba, for example, for the Zoom platform, as much as I don't know how many applications from Google and other platforms. So Cuba is under a policy that is specifically designed to create, to wreak havoc, to make the life of us so difficult that at some point the people will go and overthrow their government out of lack of medicine, food, or a normal welfare. And at the same time, the policy is designed to blame the Cuban government for the impact that the United States measures, coercive measure, has on us. The situation, I make a couple of notes, so because I'm sure that you're going to tell me that I'm going to be done with my time. But I would like to start by telling you that just except for specific issues, any president of the United States will basically could lift sanctions against Cuba. Those four things that are just dependent on Congress are the trade with the subsidiaries abroad, US subsidiaries abroad, the investment in what they consider to be confiscated property, the tourism from US to Cuba, and just the order of lifting the embargo. But by US law, almost on any other thing, through license and executive order, a president of the United States has the power to render all sanctions that are in place. So when we say that the government of President Biden bet on the maximum pressure policy to make the Cuban economy collapse in order to create more incentive to destabilization, we are not just using a rhetoric. We are talking with the law on their hands. So what Trump did, and I cannot elaborate too much on it, but the Cuban report to the Secretary General of the United Nations listed and it's also in our website in English, Cuba Minrex, lists the main measures, most of them are commercial, that were designed by President Trump and what I call his demolition team to almost surgically go after any source of income to the Cuban population and cut it and reduce it to zero. They realized that apart from the solidarious work of Cuban doctors abroad, there was an important program under the South-South cooperation terms of United Nations where Cuba gets some income with their medical service abroad, some specific program for our public health system. They cut that. They start talking about our doctors are slaves. They realized that the tourism was a source of also of income for the Cuban economy, that in the case of Cuba, as you know, the income of tourist industry goes for the people. It doesn't go to the 1% like in US or the owners. The Cuban people own our tourist investment and not the other way around like is always presented. They also made up the whole story of attacks of the embassy. They include fraudulent Cuba on the sponsor of terrorism list, which it's an economic and financial measure. And I wouldn't have the time to highlight enough how much it damaged the Cuban economy and the international financing system that is also a target of this meeting, a measure that put a country that is not a terrorist country, a country that fights against terrorism, in a list of countries that sponsor terrorism. It was a perfect nightmare, and in just 2 months, Cuba lost another 40 banks. All of these measures, both Trump and Biden's, are measures that are imposed on top of the blockade that you excellently described for what it is today. And State Department also takes credit at saying that is one of the most perfect system of unilateral coercive sanction, but is in fact is like you say, the most comprehensive system is what it is. How much minutes do I have?
You have another 4 minutes.
Okay, I think I could just really go to two other specific issues that I would like to highlight. So I was telling you that the main goal of US policy, which is to overthrow the Cuban government out of purpose of domination, and it has nothing to do with the issues of human rights. And on every single issues, we have to take distance from what US government says and what they do and what they actually do. So on human rights, as it happens also on the economic world, when they say that their main priority is to help the Cuban people, they are lying. They are lying big time. If the policy would be to really help the Cuban people, President Biden wouldn't have taken 1.5 years to take first very extremely limited measures that he promised on his electoral campaign, because he considered inhuman the twisting and twisting and twisting that the Trump team made to the embargo on Cuba, and the extra 243 measures. Among those measures, I would like to highlight 3 of Trump and Biden. On Trump, one that is very important is the prosecution against the fuel that arrived to Cuba. We are an island. We need fuel to have lights, to cook, to transport ourselves, to produce our goods in order to export. The Cuban GDP went down because of the pandemic. This is a general situation, but the entire world was not under a 60-year embargo where there's almost nothing to touch, including the private sector, because they are talking all the time about the government economy or the state, but it also affects the cooperative and the private sector in Cuba, because they just don't want, they want to suffocate an entire nation in order to get away. So it's important to say that even when US government failed in their main purpose of overthrowing the Cuban Revolution, and thanks precisely to socialism and not the other way around, because of the way that we are organized to face among all of us a challenge that is presented to all of us. That's why our pharmaceutical and biotechnological industry saved our nation with our wonderful 5 vaccines, competing decently with first world country that has no embargo, that has no ban, that are not banned from the international financial system like we are. Despite of that, these measures, strong measures, and Biden bet on this maximum pressure measure during 2021, including a coup that they also organized, that it was not just mediatic, because it has a lot of action and finance and money and budgets from US federal government employed on the same destabilization purpose. They did not fail in harming the Cuban population. So even now that our economy is experimenting a gradual recovery, just 24 hours ago, our Minister of Economy said that the Cuban economy grew for the first time 1.3% during the first semester. The effects of that combined pandemic and blockade and Trump Biden's measure provoke a lot of harm into our population. There are shortages that are important. And again, I would like to highlight and extend our gratitude to all of your organizations that were so crucial in extending the hand to the Cuban people in the moment that our closest neighbor gave us the back, but not just gave us the back, bet on our suffering. I sometimes tell my colleagues in Washington that they lose their humanity, contrary to what Cuba did. Remember what Cuba did on the day that the towers fell. We opened our 10 international airport, and we told government of George W. Bush that our airports were open for US flights in danger to land. What did Cuba did with Katrina? We created the Henry Reed Brigade, that now they call them slaves, that they say that they are involved in operation of human trafficking. This is an abuse. This is not a bilateral issue. This is not bilateral tension. This is not a country that is having troubles with the other. This is bullying. This is an abuse, and as such, it should be denounced, and it should be demanded to the US government to lift the embargo, to let Cuba live, to put an end to the fraud of having a non-terrorist. My children ask me, Mom, isn't it enough not to sponsor terrorism in order not to be in a short list of countries that sponsor terrorism, especially when they learn, and they are young guys already, what is the impact that in our daily life a measure like that it has. It's just a red tape on all financial transaction for any issue, and it's well documented in our report. I think that my time is over. I just like to tell you, to finish my presentation, that what it brings us here, that the resistance of unity of our people in times of need, when the United States double down their measures, their aggression is the way that we should call it. It also coincide with the growing feeling internationally of support to the Cuban population and the Cuban Revolution. And that unity is what brings us here. That unity is allowing us today to start breathing again, but we will not stop in denouncing, even if we are gonna continue evolving and superar, and I just forget the word in English now, to go around the US blockade and do not renounce or give up to to their interest or purpose. At the same time, we will not stop in our effort to put an end to what it should never exist. Thank you so much, and I will I'll stay here if there's some question later. Sorry if I took more time. I should have put my watch in order to follow my own presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Johanna. I see lots of hands, Zoom hands clapping around the room. It's always so important to hear from Cuba. And we will have time for question and answers to the guest speakers after we've sort of gone through the campaign, because the key thing is, as you've heard from Johanna,